Hey there, friend! So today I'm going to be reviewing The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I had heard a lot about this book, especially from Emily Fox. I've heard it on a few of her lists that she really enjoyed it, and I thought it was a good time. But before I get too into the review, let me just start with a brief overview. As you can imagine, with a title like The Song of Achilles, the book's about Achilles. I feel like a lot of us know of him in passing, at least from the phrase an Achilles heel. But something I really enjoyed is that this book kind of looks at him as more of a real, fully fleshed out person. I feel like we only see him mentioned in stories. Sometimes his own story is told in bits and pieces. Sometimes it's referenced to in other people's stories. But here we get to see basically Achilles' entire journey from boyhood into adulthood through the point of view of, and without giving too much away in case you don't already know the myth, his good friend Patroclus. And again, this is a kind of retelling of Greek mythology and tales. And so if you don't already know of Achilles' story through there, it is essentially that he's the greatest warrior of their generation and goes to fight in the Battle of Troy. But in this version, we get a lot more details and get to see a lot more insight into him as a full human, which is fun and exciting. So I'll touch on the other topics I usually cover and then get to my opinion on the book. The points of view are actually pretty easy. Patroclus is telling the story through almost the entire book. For some reason, he starts in first person present in the beginning of the book when he's talking about himself being a child. But then after that, I did a double check. Yes, after that, everything is told in past tense. Not really sure why, but I feel like past tense is a little easier to keep in mind, especially with a story like this that I know is in the past. So that felt pretty easy to follow along in. There is one moment, about one paragraph, definitely not even a full page, where the story goes from Patroclus telling it to Achilles telling it. But other than those two small divergence, usually it is all from Patroclus' point of view in the past tense. And I would say that makes it pretty easy to follow along regardless of reading level. I feel like there are a lot of kind of deeper thoughts in this book. We see Achilles go from a kind of just matter-of-fact kid that doesn't really like lying or being at all dishonest if and when he can help it, and also not really harboring any ill will towards anybody, to then becoming the most formidable of fighters in all of Greece. So I think it's kind of interesting because when you just hear that he is the biggest fighter, you think he might be a little bit of a meathead. He always just dedicates himself to being the strongest and the best. But at least Miller paints him as a very dimensional character. He doesn't really want to go kill people, and so he kind of has to battle with that. And then later he feels wronged by Agamemnon, and so doesn't want to help anymore. And so then has to struggle with, well, I don't want to do this because then this is letting him win and making him think that he's okay, and he's not. Versus how long am I going to let my pride get in the way when there are lots of people dying now because of me and my hurt pride. Lots of issues to digest. Feel like it's maybe a little easier to examine that kind of stuff because we're in the point of view of Patroclus, not Achilles. And so I think that makes these revelations and quandaries a little less frustrating. But Patroclus has some of his own struggles. He struggles early in the book with not feeling like he's good enough. There's still a bit of that drug out throughout the rest of the book, but it's really heavy at the beginning. And then towards the end of the book, Achilles does something he doesn't agree with, and Patroclus thinks that this is really the wrong way to go about things. He's frustrated that Achilles won't see reason and do what Patroclus thinks is right. And so then you see a bit of that struggle with how do you reconcile someone you love doing something that you view as not good or even terrible and really harmful, and how do you still love the person but not the action. So a few moral things to digest in here. I feel like it does it in an interesting way that's also not too terribly deep to be off-putting. So I'd say somewhere between beginner and intermediate. I don't think it really slides any further up the scale to more advanced. So as far as romantic intimacy, we don't really see much described. Definitely not past that YA standard of feeling lightheaded at his touch or stuff like that. We don't really see any graphic intimacies. However, it is quite clear that there is sex going on. So kind of like with the previous section, I would say a little higher than beginner, but still well within the parameters of intermediate. So somewhere in between there as far as maturity goes. So as you might suspect from a book that has a helmet on the cover, there's violence, there's fighting. Like, he goes off to war. We do see our share of bloody moments on the battlefield. We also see some of that reflected in Patroclus helping in the medical tent and people suffering from their bloody wounds and dying. So there's definitely a fair amount of that. So I would say, at least in this sense, I want to say it's more advanced because of all the stuff that happens, but I am also slowly coming to terms with that we're more okay with having violence in a book than romantic intimacy. So probably between intermediate to advanced. The violence probably isn't as off-putting as it sounds. So I figure this will be a short section. I don't really feel like I have a lot to say. I enjoyed the book a lot, but I'm also not like jumping up and down excited about it. I thought it was really interesting to see a figure of like antiquity brought into a lens where I could like imagine this person standing next to me. They seem as a whole person. He is not just his deeds, he's an actual like person. And that was really fun and exciting to like see, and almost kind of motivating too, that this person who did these great deeds like also has some very human traits. Yes, he's also partially divine in having a deity for a parent, but still he reads in the book at least as very human. So that kind of felt like motivation for me to go out and do something stupendous too. It seems within grasp. And then too, I guess, just getting to finally experience the full Achilles myth. I feel like I've heard him talked about maybe in like history or like mythology and stuff like that, and Odysseus shows up in here, and I did read the Odyssey, and so maybe I also heard about him mentioned in that a little bit. I'm not sure, but again, it was a good read. I'm really glad that I read it, but it will probably fall out of my mind pretty quickly. Alright, so that was my review of Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. The Too Long Didn't Read it's a good read. I would actively recommend it if you like Greek mythology or like the old like Grecian and Roman tales, especially if you're a fan of like the Odyssey or the Iliad. Odysseus is in here too, so that might be kind of fun. Or I guess just a big history buff of the Trojan War. This could also be a good read. But for me, it wasn't really a standout. It was good, but it's just not my usual cup of tea. I don't really hold any excitement about this book. I'm probably not going to end up really recommending it to people actively, but it's definitely a good read. I would never dissuade anybody from reading it. So if it sounded at all interesting to you, definitely go pick it up. Honestly, I picked it up to support my local bookstore. I had heard that it was a good book and I did enjoy reading it, but it's not my usual read is all. Anyway, I hope this video finds you well. I hope you're having a grand day, and I hope I get to see you in the next one. Bye for now.